What's going on, everybody, and welcome in. Brenden Schaeffer breaking down the March Madness bracket region by region. And in this video, we're going to break down the West region, which is, of course, the region where my Missouri Tigers are located in this bracket. So let's go ahead and get right into it. How far do I see Mizzou going, along with the other picks for the West Regional? Jumping right in, as much as I would like to see Norfolk State pull off a fun upset, and my team is not on the wrong end of it. Shout out 2012. I'm going to take Florida right off the jump to get things going here. Nothing crazy with the 1 seed in this region to begin. Moving down to the 8-9 game, we're going to pull up the preview here for ESPN. Situation where you've got an 8-9, but a pretty sizable favorite. -4.5 for the UConn Huskies. Two-time defending national champion. I was not all too impressed with Oklahoma throughout the SEC schedule this season, so it's my inclination to go ahead and take UConn, but let's go ahead and take a look. In the last video, I showed you guys from Rick Rungood. This is his spreadsheet that he put together, and a lot of good information here that can be used. The silver column is Nate Silver's projections on the team advancing, the percentage chance of that. The Yahoo column is Yahoo and the total number of percentage of the time that the team is picked by people on Yahoo playing their bracket games. That's kind of our public data, and we'll use that to try to figure out some leverage on the field. I like to kind of combine the analytics that Rick Rungood had put together in his annual video, but then also go with some of my own takes, right? Not just copy everything that he does, use it to inform, but then make meaningful, purposeful decisions on where I go in another direction based on a variety of reasons. So let's go ahead and find UConn here. As I pull up the Huskies on the bracket, or on the spreadsheet rather, 68% chance per Nate Silver to advance out of the first round. 67% is how often they're being picked on Yahoo. Nothing crazy going on there. We are working kind of backwards compared to the way that Rick Rungood, I can never figure out which one it is, does his bracket, where he picks the champion first. I'm starting in the first round because that's the way most people fill out their bracket. It is, I think, if you're trying to gain leverage on the field, smart to do it the other way. But I like kind of doing it this way. Again, even if it's not the most analytically sound in terms of game theory, it's fun for me doing it this way. Only a 31% chance for Oklahoma to beat UConn, according to Nate Silver. And selected a little less than that, according to Yahoo. This one's basically a coin flip. I'm going to ride with the analytics, though, on 68%. It matches the point spread. It matches my own personal belief about these teams. And so I'm going to have no problem selecting UConn to advance there. This is an interesting 5-12 matchup because you actually have the 12 favored. Memphis is dealing with some injuries. Memphis, a team that beat Mizzou earlier this year. Colorado State, though, -2.5 the spread. And if you take a look at the expected leverage, I believe, or the ELEV, whatever that equates to, as I'll move myself down so you can see that at the top here, Colorado State considered the best first-round pick in the region, basically, a 12.09% ELEV rating. I mean, if you look at it, Silver's got them as a little better than a coin flip to win. Only 27% of the public, at least on Yahoo, is picking them. So that's easy in terms of the analytics of it. Does it mean it's going to work out? Not necessarily, but I think that's a pick that I certainly like to make. And it's fun clicking the 12, even if they're technically the favorite by the betting odds. As I talked about in my last video, I like to pick upsets, but I think you have to be a little bit careful where you decide to go crazy with the upsets. And this is an example of that. As much as I'll be rooting for Grand Canyon, I don't know if I'll be picking them in a bracket where I'm really trying to put together my best bracket possible. Some years I just advance all the 12s and 13s and say, come what may. In some contests, it actually rewards you for doing that. By the way, I do have a bracket contest. I'm at b-schaefer12 on Twitter. If you want to send me a direct message on Twitter or comment here on YouTube so that I can get with you later if you'd like to get into the bracket challenge on ESPN that I am running. But I'm using standard scoring. First round's worth a point. Second round, 2 points. 3, 4, 5, and so on. I believe that's how it is. Actually, no. ESPN is 32 if you win it all. So it's 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32 in terms of the scoring. And because of that, I'm looking at the fact that if I take Grand Canyon to beat Maryland, I'll have to take one of Colorado State or Grand Canyon to advance to the next round. And you know what? I wouldn't have a huge problem clicking Colorado State for that, I think, if I decided to go that route. Colorado State listed on the top here. Good ELEV over the field to make the Sweet 16. 20% chance according to Nate Silver. Let's take a look at how that compares to some other teams from the region. Colorado State here, higher degree opportunity to make the Sweet 16 than Memphis because, they're slightly favored to beat Memphis in that first round. But then you have Maryland up here, right? Maryland is this 53.93%. Yahoo's only picking Maryland to advance 52.68%, so a slight advantage there, which seems a little bit odd to me. If the 12 seed is getting so much love that you would end up, still having a little bit of leverage potentially on Maryland to make the Sweet 16, does seem a little bit odd to me, just kind of thinking through it off the top. But basically, Maryland's got a better than 50% chance to get there, and I think, considering the weakness of that 5-12 matchup with the 12 actually being favored, yeah, it could be fun to go ahead and say, yeah, Colorado State all the way. But I think I'm more likely to go with the analytics on this one and go Maryland. I don't love Maryland. Maybe I changed my mind before we get into Thursday and the bracket actually beginning. But right now, I think I'm going to take Maryland to beat Grand Canyon in that first-round matchup. It is like a 10.5-point spread. I really like Grand Canyon with the points because it feels like one of those games where they're going to give it a run and then they maybe run out of gas late but still can cover the spread. But then I'll probably go Maryland to advance to the next round because, again, as you get deeper, you have to consider the likelihood of that team to even get to the round that you're talking about, which, changes the dynamic of just picking, do I think Maryland would beat Colorado State? Do I think, well, you have to think a little bit deeper than that. The game that everybody wants me to weigh in on, I'm sure. I'm a little bit, I've talked about this on the big show, a little bit concerned about Drake from Mizzou because this is a team full of guys from the state of Missouri, kind of overlooked. They're playing at Northwest Missouri State, and then they all transfer to Drake with their coach, Ben McCollum. Definitely a scary one. Interesting profile, too, for Drake. They've got the slowest tempo in the nation at 364 out of 364, but they don't allow any rebounds to their opponent despite having nobody above 6'8". They're an enigma type of team. They're the type of team, though, that scares the crap out of you when it comes to March Madness. I've seen enough of these to know that I can already kind of see the way it goes if Drake wins on Thursday, like the vibe of it. Everybody's rooting for Drake. It's so fun. They're scrappy. They're the underdog. Scaring the crap out of me. I'm going to pick Mizzou because of a homer pick, but I think it is a true coin flip. And if you were to look at the analytics of this one, make the round of 32, Nate Silver says 58%, right in line with, it looks like, what the public is picking. Drake, 41% chance to get there, 38%. I don't know why these numbers don't add up quite to 100% either. Maybe just some empty brackets, which, again, that's something that's worth thinking about because that influences the fact that they think this is a great expected leverage play over here with Drake as I move the stuff around a little bit. This 1.44% may not really be the case if it's just because there's some empty brackets. And, if you picked a few more on Yahoo for Drake, a few more for Mizzou, then you get to about, close to 60-40 or 61-40, and it ends up being basically what the field projects. So there's not any leverage associated with that. And I do think I'm going to go Texas Tech over Wilmington. I'll be rooting for Wilmington. When is that game played, by the way? That's the night game on Thursday. Imagine Mizzou wins on Thursday night, and then you're like, dude, go Wilmington so that Mizzou doesn't have to play Texas Tech. I got Texas Tech going pretty far. I'm going to just punch them in over Missouri, so I'm not tempted to do anything crazy. Mizzou could win. Mizzou could absolutely beat Texas Tech, but I'm guarding my heart when it comes to the bracket because I know I'll be rooting for Mizzou, but if they're down, I'll at least be able to say, well, my bracket's doing okay if it's Texas Tech. And here's part of the reason. I was actually high on St. John's coming through before I started looking at everything. But then when I started to get a glimpse of all this, I want to hide some of these columns here so we can look at to make the Sweet 16. Mizzou with a 24% chance, only be picked 22% on Yahoo. So, there's a little bit of a benefit there. Colorado State certainly would be leverage if you were to make that pick. I decided to go with the odds in Maryland, as we talked about, 20% for Silver, 53% that it actually happens. Texas Tech is getting a nice little boost over this Mizzou Drake contingent because, the way you figure it, Texas Tech almost 60%. We don't really know if it's going to be Mizzou or if it's going to be Drake. So, there's probably about a 40% chance of either of those teams beating Texas Tech. Texas Tech is more likely to just coast through the first round. Texas Tech is kind of a negative expected leverage to make the Sweet 16. But when you get even further, when you get to that matchup with St. John's, suddenly that plus 2.3% there's a 31% chance that Tech gets there, and that's kind of being underweighted when you look at this is the matchup here that it would be. All the blue boxes, let me make sure I shift that over enough to be seen. The top numbers are St. John's, 38%, 39% chance to win in the Sweet 16 to make the Elite Eight. Almost half, 49%, are picking St. John's to advance to the Elite Eight on Yahoo. Whereas with Tech, it's 31%. It's only 7-8% less than St. John's likelihood, but the number of teams, or pardon me, the number of contestants picking, players picking that to happen is almost half, or less than half, 49% down to 24%. So there's the leverage, right? If it happens, you knock out all these people who took St. John's, whereas if you take St. John's, well, you're just doing what everybody else did. So you might as well zig where they zag a little bit and be able to gain some leverage that way. And so that's why Texas Tech and Rick Rungood ended up having Texas Tech advance it pretty far. And so that's why I've got Texas Tech moving through. I will advance St. John's over Omaha. Let me talk about this Kansas and Arkansas matchup real quick. I mean, this is going to be a fun one to see. Kansas favored pretty handily. What's interesting, though, again, if you're trying to find leverage, if you don't have a strong take, and I really don't when it comes to that Kansas-Arkansas game, excuse me, 72% chance for Kansas to beat Arkansas, according to Nate Silver. And, I don't know if he's full of it or not, but that's a significant swing, whereas only 62% are taking Kansas. So that's a huge boost, almost to not quite to the level of Colorado State, picking them to win the first round, but that's significant. So there's more people. I mean, it's a very simple concept, but there's essentially, and I don't know if I showed the leverage there, that 701% for Kansas is significantly beneficial, whereas moving myself around to find Arkansas, it's a negative 1.89% expected leverage to take Arkansas. So basically, Arkansas is less likely to win, and more people are picking them than their likelihood to win, according to the analytics. So you're actually gaining by picking the favorite in this case, which is Kansas. Now, let's say there's a world in which Mizzou advances, beats Drake, beats Texas Tech. I'll be rooting for this, folks. I'll be rooting for Missouri and Kansas to be facing off, no doubt about it, in the Sweet 16. I'm not scared of that matchup one bit, but I am taking Texas Tech, and I also think St. John's gets the better of Kansas. But what we're going to do is advance advance Texas Tech to the Elite Eight for the reasons that we talked about when it came to, as I'll kind of get rid of some of this stuff here, hide it for a moment to give you my logic behind it. When you get to the expected leverage, Texas Tech is a nice little positive over the field. And I think they're a really good basketball team, so there's a chance that they do get there. I think Kansas is going to be really tricky. I think Arkansas could be tricky for St. John's, who is one of those teams that when you look at the different analytics, they don't have quite the offensive profile. And the analytics for teams that do well in March, they're balanced. They're good on offense, good on defense. Mizzou's problem is they're good on offense, bad on defense. St. John's almost has the opposite problem. They're not a very good offensive team or a consistent offensive team, but they are a very, very strong defensive team. And so, that ends up kind of making it a little bit difficult that you could envision them getting tripped up at some point. Whereas with Tech, see if we can find Texas Tech here. They are 6th in offensive efficiency, 37th in defensive efficiency. So lagging behind a little bit defensively, but still better than St. John's is in the 60s offensively. So more balanced than St. John's. I think Tech, they rank a little bit higher in KenPom, 7 versus 11 than St. John's, and so I'm taking that one. You could go this way. You could go this way with Kansas over St. John's if you really wanted to. But I think St. John's is really good. I'm only really picking against them because of the leverage that Texas Tech brings. So again, big contests, I think the leverage gets interesting. Now, Texas Tech, as you move forward, is also a really good leverage play to get to the Final Four. And not to give away Rick Rungood's whole video, but this is kind of what he does. He has them advancing pretty far because of this region. There's still a 13.99% chance that they get out of the region, which is the third most behind St. John's and Florida, which makes sense. They're the 3 seed. But look at the difference. Florida's being picked to do it 54% of the time. St. John's 20%. 13%, 13.9% still a pretty good chance, and they're being left for dead, basically, relative to their chances to make it. You could say kind of the same thing about Maryland. And so I think you could go either direction with Tech and Maryland, which is why we're actually going to move Maryland a little bit further too, because I think that gives us some positive leverage. So you say, well, how does Florida get knocked out? Well, that's what we have to decide. And look, this is, I think, Rick Rungood, I think he takes, as I'm trying to figure out here how to get this all back, I think he takes Florida pretty far, if I recall, in his video. But this is where I'm like, I'm using the same principles, but I want to change it up and kind of go with my gut on some of these too. And so let's look at UConn, because that's a 1 versus 8 matchup that if it happens, UConn's a 2-time defending national champion. Could it be interesting to see UConn potentially slip in there? Silver's given them a 16% chance to make it, only the public giving a 10%, so there's a little bit of positive expected leverage there on the field, because the likelihood of them doing it is greater than, it exceeds the amount of people picking it to happen. So if it happens, which the higher the likelihood, is more likely to happen, but it's still like 16% is still enough that's nothing to sneeze at. Problem is Florida's 78%. It's so likely that Florida would advance over UConn. And it's Oklahoma's being kind of left for dead. I mean, that really tells you that they think UConn's going to win the first one. So the thing that I want to do, and I don't know if I have the guts to do it, is take UConn. What did I write down on my bracket? I did write down UConn. So this is how I end up with a Maryland team in the Elite Eight that I don't even really like this Maryland team, and I'm going to be rooting against them on the very first game. But it feels like one of those teams that, I mean, if this is their path, a 13, they get a 12, they get an 8, they kind of end up there by themselves. And I'll take Texas Tech to beat them because I think Tech's got a better chance of advancing. You got to worry about Florida. I think Tech can handle St. John's if St. John's has a bad shooting day with that offensive efficiency. And so I end up with Texas Tech in my Final Four facing Michigan State, and I do it by fading Florida, which is scary. But you know what? I saw Florida play 2 games this year that weren't very good at all against Mizzou, when Mizzou beat them in Gainesville, and then the game against Georgia a few weeks ago, they just got crushed in the first half and didn't really ever quite recover. They tried to recover, but I do believe they ended up losing that game. But that's where I am at with Florida, is like, could they, against the 2-time defending national champs, if Dan Hurley gets his guys together, could they fall flat in a game? And that's really all it might take. And then think about the leverage you'll have over the field if that happens. Granted, if Florida makes the run, a lot of people probably picked them to make the run anyway, and so it's okay to get a little creative and different. I like getting creative and different because of the 10 years where, you'll have chalk and it'll all be 1s and 2s in the Final Four. You have the year where you pick a 3 or a 4 and you maybe do it a couple of times throughout your bracket and you're right. That'll be bragging rights forever. So that's what I shoot for when it comes to March Madness. That's what we've got. I know Mizzou fans probably disappointed. In other videos, I can talk more about Mizzou. I think the Drake thing is tricky. If they actually get by Drake, which I'm not 100% that they will, I could see them really making a run. But if I'm not sure they're going to get out of that first game, I'm going to just take them for that first one and then say, you know what, Texas Tech, I think, is going to be a tough out for a lot of teams. So that's the way we're going to take it in the the West region. Let me know if you have thoughts. Half of our Final Four is filled. More videos to come as we fill out the rest of the bracket. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to you soon.